So welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Enna Reittort is back, and we are going to talk about mind control, the gods, the Elohim, and what have all these subjects to do with each other. So, Enna, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to come back. We're beginning to have a habit here. And yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's good to continue the conversation, with somebody you already know,
Mm.
because we can start going into corners where we wouldn't go otherwise. And you asked me about, okay, let's talk about the Elohim, and I wrote back to you and I said, I'm not a specialist in the matter of the Elohim. But I
Mhm.
have, the perspective of what the Elohim have done to us, whoever they may be. There's lots of people who say all sorts of stuff about extraterrestrials and all sorts of things like that. Um, in terms of what we can say objectively, well, the only things we have are the ancient texts and the odd bits and pieces from archaeology where you have strange beings wearing funny hats and little bags that seem to be containing some kind of magic something. So, apart from that, a lot of people have all sorts of different theories. And so I don't feel too comfortable about theories, especially as, science and knowledge seem to be built increase. I mean, we seem to be stuck in certain theories that have been erected to a status of dogma. That's the religious system for you that applies in science, in medicine, in everything now. And my concern is that lots and lots of people who are doing very serious research seem to be deriving theories from this research, which seem to me to be mainly intellectual. And when we're dealing with these issues where we've been fucked over by powerful entities and their minions here on Earth, there is a very profound spiritual thing or esoteric thing at hand here. And we cannot get to the bottom of the esoteric occult aspects of what they're doing only with the resources of our intellectual mind. And this is where the power of real meditation not with the mind, not with the focus on the third eye in the head, but meditation that is more contemplation in terms of being open to subtle reality speaking to you on its own terms. And so I've been doing a bit of that in respect of the Elohim. So what I can say, it's not a theory, it's just the insights that seem to come to me in a state of contemplation, and for which I have an ideomotor or a kinesiological verification system that comes through the subconscious speaking through my body.
Mhm.
And so whatever comes my way, because I am a rational, you know, academically trained human being, and I don't go in for the woo-woo just like that. I don't channel, I'm not psychic, none of those things. But in the state of contemplation, I let whatever wants to come through, I let it come in on its own terms. And it has to go through what I call the inner translator that is going to convey this in some form of language that my mind can take and can work with. But I have to be very careful about this, which is why I have this kinesiological system which runs through the fingers. I don't use a pendulum. I don't use any of those things, any of those props, because all too often I've seen people subconsciously making the pendulum go this way or that. They don't even realize it. So, I'm very strict with this verification. And so what I'm getting is, okay, we know about the Elohim from biblical and other texts from that region of the world, different cultures, which apparently use the same term, Elohim. That's what they call themselves, like the bosses, the administrators, and ultimately they were the colonizers. Fine. But if they were reflected in texts, before the texts were written, they would have been around for a much, much longer period of time. It takes tens of thousands of years of oral tradition before eventually something gets written down. And generally, when it gets written down, it gets to some extent simplified, distorted, modified. And then over time, the initial text gets modified and distorted again to make it fit a geopolitical agenda or something like that. So what I'm getting is that the Elohim have been around several tens of thousands of years. What I'm getting is that the Elohim are some kind of humanoid, but without a soul. And this has to do with the profoundly technological aspect of so many of these extraterrestrial cultures or civilizations. Bless you. I find it striking that all these, ufology, this, that, and the other, and the people who channel information from other civilizations, it's all very technological. Some of them seem to have some spiritual qualities. Some of them are very advanced compared to us, but they all have technology. And it seems, that technology is the really important defining factor. And with technology, they can take humanoids and they can, these humanoids can be made into much more powerful beings than we are, as humans on Earth, flesh and blood and soul, and with all our diversity, strangeness, and undigested trauma and everything. So these Elohim, in the biblical and other texts, they're technological. They've got these weird machines that have been spiritualized, in the way the Bible is translated. But they've got all this machinery. They're a bunch of tech individuals who are basically humanoids, but without a soul. And because they don't have a soul, there are a bunch of things about them that remain very primitive, much less developed than in us, such as the emotions. And the driving emotion of those individuals, of those people, is actually fear. And what came to me actually in contemplation today is that the fear is transmitted by, whatever these extraterrestrial beings are. It's transmitted to, along with the power that they give to, whoever is going to be king, high priest, and, the top bureaucrats of their empire on Earth. This fear is instilled in these top-ranking people, and it's the fear that comes when you have power. When you have power, your greatest fear is to lose that power, because you become dependent on having power over people, over, physical reality and things like that. And this is something that actually you find when you start looking at the psychology of the different gods and the different cultures. this business of fear, the fear of losing their power and their immortality or their very, very long longevity. They fear the death of whoever it is that they are in a way that is, I think, very difficult for us humans to understand. It's got very little to do with how we would, normally relate to the natural death that comes after a certain length of time. And whatever social classes, the other thing is that they create stratified hierarchies in societies, in human societies. And these, in these stratified sort of pyramids, most of the people who can contemplate the possibility are going to want to rise in the ranks. They want to get higher and higher up. The higher up you climb in the pyramid, the more you are going to be infected by this psychological thing of the gods, which is that fear. And you can look at the different sort of priesthoods who are running the religions of, money, medicine, and things. Once you start looking into what they're doing, you can see this fear. It's very, very naked. The more they assert their power, the more they are showing fear. So that's a really important aspect to bear in mind. And the fear is also something that, okay, there's also the other type of fear that has been instilled in us, ordinary humans, over the millennia through torture, sacrifice, all sorts of violence imposed upon us. It's a different fear. It's not the fear of, losing our power over reality. It's the fear, the existential fear of the small kid that is being tortured. It's the existential fear of the person who's having MK Ultra treatment, of those who go, who are in these satanic sort of ritual things. And now when you've got the two that converge in elite families, we have the power that comes from being in those lineages and the element of fear that comes with that power. Plus you have the fear that is instilled from childhood through the grooming, the training that they have to have. You put those two streams of fear together, and that's how it works in those lineages. But where we need to wonder, we Western people especially, we've had the privilege of education, of middle class status, of having access to all sorts of things. We have, brains that work. Let's say we have more of a thinking capability, at least some of us now, than most illiterate people in the world, although they have a different intelligence that we don't understand.
Mm.
To what extent has that element of fear coming from above infected our minds such that we stay in line with the system, that if you look at most middle class people, they're mortally afraid of losing everything, of becoming homeless, of not being able to have this and that sort of, whatever convenience or ability that we are accustomed to have by virtue of being middle class from developed countries. I've been living, in the third world amongst peasants for the past 25 years now. The difference between my Western acquaintances and friends and the people amongst whom I live, that huge gap is something that, I'm forever processing and digesting. And, I think it really has to do with our relationship with reality and the fact of what it is in in the reality around us and in us that we fear or don't fear. The people around me don't fear the same things as in the West. And there's a further aspect in terms of this piece of mind programming that we've had from especially the Elohim, is compounded by the fact that we have very functional minds, thinking minds. And at the same time, we are not aware of how our minds prevent us from seeing the reality in front of our eyes very often, prevents us from seeing ourselves, feeling ourselves. And, I've found this a lot in respect of, my second book, which is about this contemplation modality, which in Japan they call non-doing, which for some strange reason, I just fell into it naturally. And I discovered that a lot of people can have an instant sort of falling into it, but they don't hold on to it. And going back every day for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes a day, to be in this attitude of non-doing, the mind is going to come up with all sorts of something else. No, don't go there. Just don't go there. It's useless. Just don't go there. I mean, non-doing bullshit, over and over again. And the more I've been contemplating this, and the more I see that there is actually a very complex mind programming that we've inherited. And it has to come from those entities that colonized the particular part of the world from which the major religions come. In Buddhism is basically all about getting rid of the fetters, the shackles that the mind puts on you to be able to feel the fundamental nature of reality. Okay, I mean, it's been modified since then because now all these countries are modernizing. But so, and in animistic people, they don't have this kind of issue in the mind. Consequently, it has to come from there. It has to come from these Elohim people. With their particular mind thing. Which goes with the technological aspect also. Because, if we were completely connected to ourselves, to the totality of who we are as humans, yeah, we'd have tools, we'd have things, but they would not become such an all-encompassing and all-important thing as they are becoming now.
Yeah.
So
Enna, usually when people, let's say, start out, thinking about the Elohim, and what you will find is always that, the expert texts say, yeah, sure, this is a masculine plural, but it is used in the singular form as a majestic plural to describe the one true God. And the one true God, of course, is the one from the Bible then, usually. So does that make any sense to you?
What, this business of it being, a majestic plural that is
because the two of us, we are talking in terms of the Elohim, meaning a group of people. But usually
Yeah.
what people are being fed is, yeah, well,
Oh, sure.
it's a masculine plural, but there is only one Elohim. And I have a
Yeah.
problem.
Well, it's the same as the kings who were anointed by divine right. They would say, "We have decided, it's okay." So it's another royal thing. It's it's the problem of the bloody Lord. It's his problem. So if people want to be caught up in that problem,
Mhm.
well, they're free to. I mean, I'm not going to. I'm not going to try and persuade them otherwise. There were a bunch of Elohim, and that is written in the texts. And so Elohim, yeah, objectively speaking, is the plural of, denoting these particular people, this particular race of ETs or whatever you want to call them, who came and they decided to colonize this place. And eventually they realized that colonizing and keeping people under control through violence was kind of counterproductive. And over time they figured, well, let's turn this into what for us now today is a religion with a system of brainwashing and soul washing. And but this business of okay, Elohim has been changed from a pure plural into a majestic singular. It's just all part of the game, of
Okay,
that
yeah.
game.
Mm.
It's not our game.
Mm.
If we want to be fully human, it is not our game, it's theirs.
Mm.
Don't you think?
Yeah, of course, I totally agree. I do not buy into that story. There is only one Elohim. Um, I I am convinced that this plural is there for a reason. And then when it says, let us make humans in our image, um, yeah, what does that really mean?
Well, there, you've got the interesting thing of Mauro Biglino, who is the authoritative translator, of the Elohim plural. And, this business of let's make them in our image, it has to do with taking a minute something from the God, the so-called God, and putting it in the doll or the clay representation of human being. But wait a minute, if you come to think of it, why let's look at, if we understand the other aspect, which is mentioned in the Gnostic texts, which is that the demiurge is incapable of his own creativity. He can only simulate.
Mhm.
Well, then the El, or the bunch of Elohim who went about creating the human in his or their image, were imitating something. So it's implied that they were imitating themselves. But then who made them in the first place? If you're going to go along with any one of these statements from the religious texts, okay, who made them? The Elohim. Once you understand that Elohim is a plural, denoting a bunch of people who were there as administrators and colonizers of the different parts of that region of the world. And that is documented in the Old Testament. Okay, so who made them? What I'm getting in my contemplation is that the human being that we are is extremely ancient. And in that perspective, it could be that Elohim kind of people or other kind of people could be less ancient than us, and they could have made themselves as a simulation of our image. Okay, I'm pushing it way beyond, the sentence in the Bible. But basically, in the image of is a false rendition of, okay, Yahweh put a little minute portion of himself, which Mauro Biglino understands to be a little bit of DNA. Okay, DNA is something that we have discovered in very modern research. But what we call DNA is only a certain tiny fragment of a totality that the scientists have not deciphered. Until recently, it was called junk DNA, all the rest of it. So, okay, if the Elohim made us with a tiny little bit of something, which is only a small percentage of something much, much larger, and at the same time, if the Elohim are not really divine beings, but they are basically extraterrestrials who came here on their flying machines, there are a lot of things that do not stick together. They don't make sense together. And so, when I'm sitting in my altered state of consciousness, things are put upside down. And I get this notion that, hey, it may well appear that the human image, the human form, is way more ancient and may have been the original model for all these other ET beings. I'm only suggesting, I can't prove this. There's no way anything of what I'm saying can be proven. But there are logical ways of looking at these texts. Once you've got a couple of clues, such as what Mauro Biglino gives us through his literal translation, then you start pulling on these threads and you correlate them with other ancient texts. And I'm also looking at, if you look also at the very ancient stuff that is conveyed in Indian mythology, then you've got other elements of this puzzle that make it way more complex and interesting. And I haven't, gotten to the bottom of that yet, but it goes way further. There is this notion in very ancient Indian myths that not many Indians have been pursuing, actually, but it was one of the very ancient roots of the esoteric grassroots movement in which I had my initiation in India, where you have the notion of Purusha as the human being, who is the partner of Prakriti, translated as nature. But basically, Prakriti is the feminine principle and Purusha is the masculine principle, expressing itself in the form of a mega subtle human idea. And it is said in the myth that this Purusha sacrificed himself. Now, as you know, I've got a problem with the word sacrifice. Unless because basically it's about making sacred, making separate. So you make separate from the profane world of ordinary humans, whatever place is going to be your shrine, whatever animals or babies you're going to sacrifice, they're all going to be made separate, consequently sacrificed. The other possibility, sacrum facere, being to make separate, could be understood as this proto idea of the human who cut himself up into little pieces, and all these little pieces would become all the creatures of the world. Not only human, but animals and everything else. Now you add to this the fact that whatever myth comes down to us in written form is always a distortion of something more ancient and more holistic, then the only way you can try and go back to something less distorted is to put it in your meditation or your contemplation. So, which is why I'm for the first time, I think, speaking out about the kind of things that come to me in a contemplative state, saying that I cannot prove them. On the other hand, if there is any grain of truth in what I'm saying, it may resonate with at least a few people who are listening.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of what the Sumerian texts say. There we have Namu, the primordial water. Then we have Ki, the earth, and An, the sky or heaven. So, and they made it and produced Enlil.
Enlil.
Enlil. And Enlil then claimed his domain over the earth, right from the get-go.
Yeah, well, there you are. I mean, that is such a projection of, the way human kingdoms have been operating for the past 3,000 plus years. Okay, you've got a distortion right there. How was it before that? Yes, there was the ocean of the ethers. The ethers operate by fluid dynamics. So all these ancient myths where they talk about the primordial waters, they're not water like, what we understand to be water and separating the sky from the earth. What happens is the ethers, which are the precursors of all the other elements, there's all sorts of movement and counter movement and energy flowing around there. And they start with, cosmic dust. They start congregating into something that is going to become what we call water, the solids that are going to become what we call the element earth. And then there's the lighter elements, which are going to become the gases that make what we call air. But it all comes from that fundamental business of ethers as obeying fluid dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. But if we have this sort of intellectual tendency to read ancient texts with our literal mind, without understanding how, well, for one thing, there can be difficulties in translation into a modern language. That's one level of difficulty. Second, there could have been a difficulty in their transcription of what they perceived in their oral language. And in any religious or spiritual oral language, there are things that are not said. They're only implied in between the words that are actually said. So how did those things get conveyed in the written language? That's another issue. And, there's the mode of communication of the subtle world, the world that's all around us and within us, which does not communicate with what we use as human language. But it communicates. If it didn't communicate, you and I wouldn't be alive.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is where this notion of the inner translator and the honesty of the inner translator becomes really, really important. Both from the subtle into our human language and from our human language back into the subtle. It's quite something. But now these ancient texts, even even with modern texts, modern texts, well, we've discovered, for instance, we have to learn to read between the lines, like they did in the former Soviet Union. And most of us Westerners, we've always taken for granted that we had democracy and everything was, hunky-dory for us. So we never learned that skill. But now more and more people are, they're seeing, oh, there's the dirty, greasy paws of the WEF there. And, oh, that's the WHO there. Okay, so, there's a lot of, so, nothing can be taken for granted, be it an ancient text or a modern text. It's crazy.
Yeah. In India and especially in Indian mythology, what I always find very intriguing is the description of vimanas. And so it appears there was really something going on. I don't think that it was just, fantasy.
Oh,
That,
no.
yeah.
No. I mean, in an Indian esoteric lore is very practical. I mean, it's only recently that, especially with their relation, with their interactions with Westerners, they've started becoming much more sort of spiritualistic in a way that is adapted to Western's sense of spirituality. But it's very, very, any true mysticism is practical because it lives here in this practical world. When we're out there as floating around as pure spirits or whatever it is that we do when we're not in incarnation, it's different from what it is here. So, and it probably doesn't need to be practical, but here we live in physical reality, which is a remarkable phenomenon of materialization, of densification, and of manifestation. And so we have to obey the, laws of physics of what we call 3D. But the Vimana thing, no, in the Mahabharata, I mean, all the weaponry that they were hurling at each other, that was all, it was all ET stuff.
Yeah. And
I think there are people who've been building Vimanas based on the old, the Vimana Shastra, the old treatises. So,
and they are operational?
kind of. I mean, have they been able to, if they have done anything that is operational, I don't think they would make it publicly known. It would probably be maintained as a state secret, and probably only the CIA and, the Russian equivalent who have their spies there have found out. But if they made a Vimana from the ancient texts and it actually worked, I think that would be a state secret.
Yeah, probably. We are not very transparent that way. And yeah, it could also be that there is a whole different type of fuel behind it, what gives it energy, that they, for whatever reason, that they do not want to be out there. Which could probably, solve the energy problems here once and for all. But of course, that is not wanted either.
Well, especially as there are too many crazy people on Earth. I mean, and I'm not only talking about the elites. There are too many crazy people. If you gave them that kind of source of energy, what the hell would they do?
Exactly.
Okay. So, I mean, it is true that as a collective, the human race on Earth that is here now which is actually a degraded race, is not ready for this kind of, so-called supernatural stuff, which is actually completely natural, but we've degraded ourselves out of the fullness of nature. And by nature, I'm not talking only about the trees around us. I'm talking about, all that is, basically. So yeah, the energy aspect but it has a lot to do with what one does with one's consciousness, whatever that means, because it means different things also. I have a problem between, oh yes, the consciousness of the universe, and we need to plug our consciousness into the consciousness,
Why?
but I mean, does the universe think? For us, our consciousness is something that thinks.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have an altered state of consciousness. The fact that we call it altered means that it's not the regular consciousness, which means that there are different ways of having consciousness. And none of this is defined, none of this is clear. There again, because we have not integrated the subtle reality that is 95% of all of reality. We have not integrated it into, what we are as incarnational beings in an incarnational reality all around us. And as long as we, these things don't work together, we're in trouble.
Mm. What is also interesting with the vimanas that, you can look at any holy text you want. There's always war. And when you go back, we have the character of Azazel. And Azazel was the one who introduced weapons to humanity.
Hmm.
So, some people try to tell me, yeah, that was only for defending ourselves. But that is such a ruse, Let's just spin this thought. If there was a time in our distant past where we did not have any need for weapons, how is introducing weapons to us a progression or a benefit? That makes no sense.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other aspect is I think by our very essence as human beings, we are not naturally geared to fighting and war. Our natural inclination is cooperation. And it's funny that, war has become the big and constant thing for the past several millennia. And I think we owe it to, once again, these guys that we call the Elohim, and whoever operated along the same principles, starting several tens of thousands years ago, perhaps 40, 50,000 years ago. Weapons, I mean, a hammer that you're going to use to build your house can be a weapon. Anything can be a weapon.
Yeah,
a
I
barrel
get
of
what you
water
mean,
can,
but in that particular case, that was really that was weapons for allegedly self-defense. Yes, of course, you can have a potato knife and kill somebody with that.
yeah.
But there is a
But I mean, it's
difference between the
the
intent behind the potato knife and the sword.
of course. But then the whole point is, how is it that the paradigm of war became so dominant in the human experience
Yeah.
if fundamentally we are not built that way? It's not part of our, fundamental blueprint. It was imposed upon us. And so, it was imposed upon us by some people who had, and there again, if you just go back to the Bible and the kind of things that Mr. Yahweh used, well, they were kind of weapon-like, there was the fire that came from his, what's it called, the ruach, his chariot that would blind you or, whatever, fry you on sight.
The
Even
Ark of the
the
Covenant
thing, the
was a
plate.
weapon system.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was all weaponry. So, okay, then is it in that context that Azazel came and gave us weapons as self-defense?
No,
I think,
that was
people,
Azazel came long before that.
that was long before that, exactly. So, which simply tells us, that validates what I've just been saying about the fact that what is written in the Old Testament and in the old, Mesopotamian texts is something that comes from a much earlier oral tradition based on the experience of people who lived there before they had writing systems. So, it may well be that the humans who were there had a hard time with these Elohim or whoever they were tens of thousands of years ago and needed to defend themselves. But then the first thing you would take to defend yourself would be a shield, not another weapon. It would be, armoring, making several layers of wood in your house, or, they would be protective, not defensive in that sense, not defensive as weapons, but just the protective aspect. But I'm just splitting hairs right now. But fundamentally, if I'm correct about this notion of there's a particular mind program that has been installed in us from the Elohim, which is based on fear, because if people were not afraid of others, basically, of
things they don't
of the
know
ways.
and understand.
Well, yeah, but then basically, the fear and greed go together.
Mm-hmm.
When you're fearful, you never have enough. You never are enough. So, then you have to have conquest. And to have conquest, well, perhaps some tribes you'll be able to subdue peacefully, but very often they're not going to go along with your program and you're going to have to wage war on them. So, okay, then you've got war. But war, it seems that war became prevalent on this planet only some thousands of years ago. The prehistoric records in archaeology very often denote cultures that did not have anything. The Mohenjo-Daro and places like that in India, archaeologists were struck by the fact that they didn't find any weapons. There was nothing indicating that these people feared or waged war. That's worth knowing. I mean, that's archaeologists. This isn't just crazy me saying it. It's archaeologists who are finding this kind of information. So there is something in our relatively recent prehistory that taught us the need to wage war and to defend ourselves. But that's relatively recent.
Yeah.
And that's part of the Elohim program. I mean, they certainly imposed, their domination in a violent kind of way on us. And they forced, Yahweh forced his particular tribe to go and eradicate all the other tribes all around. So, okay, we've got, but that was later than the initial start of conquest and war, but not necessarily that much later. And then, it became naturalized in human culture that war would be such a major phenomenon. And then, there was this period that they call the axial period, approximately 800 BC to 600 AD, which was a warring period. And it's very interesting that in that period BC is when you have these great people like the Buddha. What's his name?
Gautama.
Yeah, Gautama for the Buddha, and then and the Jain. I
Okay.
forget the names. Anyway, the other major great, these great people who were giving a human antidote to conflict
Mm.
in the minds of people. And then, the figure of Jesus, whoever and whatever that was. So there was a particular intensification during what they call the axial period, an intensification of war across, the whole known civilized part of the earth. And I suppose, you had the same happening in what we call Latin America now. So there again, war and weapons, they're relatively recent in the in the human saga, let's say. Not going to say history nor prehistory, but basically, in the story of who we are. And we may have learned it, we may very well have learned it from somebody else, and it became internalized and naturalized in our minds.
Some people say that what we call gods, that is, just a manifestation of the human mind, and they wouldn't exist if we didn't believe in them. That makes also no sense to me. So in other words, that is
that we invented God.
All the gods.
All the gods. Well, there again, I mean, the El called Yahweh is not called a god in the Hebrew text.
Yeah.
And becomes called a god in the Western Bible.
Yeah.
So okay, so I mean, there you've got, that's a human modification, call it an invention. They didn't invent the character because the character was historically there in the Middle East, but they added something to it. In very ancient times, humans did not have a cult of the sun. The sun was this natural, beautiful, very necessary partner of the earth and of life on earth. Over time, as the spiritual or subtle or knowing connection between humans and the sun degraded, humans started turning the sun into a god and rendering a cult to the god with the help of priests, whom we did not need before that.
Yeah, the priesthood
So,
throughout
you've got
the priesthoods throughout the millennia, that is a huge problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, without them, there would be no religions. Sooner or later, if we had made the sun into a god, well, we would have come around to realizing that no, I mean, it's an extraordinary being that is incarnated there as this star. And there's an extraordinary being who is incarnated here as this earth. And there's a bunch of extraordinary beings who are incarnated here as humans, and extraordinary beings who are incarnated here as horses and cows and cats and lizards and what have you. And things would fall back into their proper place if we were not messed around with like that. So, but there is also the fabrication of, in my book, I talk about the money god. Money is not intrinsically a god, but its priesthood actually turned it functionally into a god, whereby, a naive person would look at the way we behave with money and say, but you've got a religion, money is your god. Even though we would not, but then we would have to, well, actually, yes. I mean, this child saying that the emperor has no clothes. Well, this child is telling me that I'm behaving with money as if it were my god. So in a way, you can have gods that are invented by humans. There are different variations, there are different configurations, but they all have to do with a particular, level of where reality becomes, it can be manipulated by certain people, the priesthood, or it's, money is something that is not real, but that is given real power over the things that we need in life, consequently over life. Consequently, it's a god. I mean, it's because there is this sort of zone between our regular reality where we don't really need money if we have, food and we have barter and we have neighbors and we have, whatever. My area produces copper and your area produces salt, and I don't have any salt. Well, we're just going to exchange the stuff that we have and we can manage perfectly well. However, when we start figuring that, hey, it would be great if we could have something that would express value without having to be attached to any particular thing, be it copper or salt or rye or iron or whatever. And so then you go into the realm of abstraction, an abstraction that begins to govern reality. Now, that abstraction can start to have its own esoteric power. So this is where we come out of real reality operate, and they are distorted into abstract systems which can be hijacked by priests and gods and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's
and what we also find with the gods is, and I don't think it is just because we anthropomorphized them. I think there was really something going on, and you find all horrible traits with them. You find patricide, infanticide. You will find war and collusion and evilness and betrayal. And so sometimes I wonder if we learned that from them. And I also wonder, what could it look like here if nobody had ever messed with us?
Well, exactly. That's exactly my point. Exactly. What the stuff that, most of the shit that we do to each other and to nature is not natural to who we are.
Yeah.
It is simply not. And, the more you actually live in your day-to-day life, governed by that certainty, the stronger that certainty becomes. We look at whatever it is that the news tells you about these horrible things, and we look at all the stuff that that is being perpetrated on humankind and on all of life by all these crazy transhumanists and AI and all the climate modification and all the poisons put everywhere. That's not okay. There are humans who are doing this on behalf of whoever it is out there that gives them the power to do it. And it's something that is, demonic. So it's, yeah, it's gods of some kind, that are, I mean, to my mind, it's an absolute, the God that I call Technomind God is an absolutely real being out there. And it possesses the minds of ever so many human beings along the lines of, the overarching importance of technology. Whereas in a sane technological civilization, we would be controlling whatever machines with our focus, with our concentration, with the touch of one finger that conveys exactly the right information to the machine. I mean, we're very, very far from that. But this is it's a little bit like the very great musician who is one with his violin. There's the talent, the fluid, the whatever it is in that human being that is capable of expressing itself through that instrument, that technology. An instrument, a violin is a piece of technology, but there is this perfect match, and the violin responds to the touch of that particular individual in a way that is completely unique. The same with, a great martial artist. Great martial artist will, use whatever stick or saber or sword or whatever in a way that is so completely, there's a complete sort of communion between the individual and the tool that is just beyond 3D. And so, that's, if we want to be technological, that's what we need to strive for. And the problem is we've been spoiled by, convenience and the illusion of our superior thing up here. And our head has been cut off from our bodies, and we're not in touch with the subtle world all around us. So, yeah, we're not in a very good position. But if we can just allow ourselves to let the possibility exist somewhere in our minds or in our heart consciousness that we are not what we are now as human beings. Your cat's tail does all sorts of really interesting things. I think it's saying hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the tail that it wants to show me. It doesn't want to show its face. It's always the tail.
Yeah, I know. So, the two of us, we are sitting here talking about, yeah, well, I guess for the two of us, it is a fact that we have been messed and tampered with since day one. And hence our somewhat pitiful state of affairs here. And, then I think about here, for instance, in Germany, the war drums in media and with certain politicians are drumming and drumming and drumming. Anna, why is it that so, yeah, apparently not too many people get it. They fall into this rut again. We have to be war ready in 5 years because Putin is going to conquer all of Europe, and this bullshit,
Yeah,
that
it's
we are
been going on
touting.
for a long time. It's been going on for such a long time, and it's always the Russians. They've got such a big place anyway. Why the
Yeah.
hell should they want to take over Europe? Europe
And
is a
for
bloody
what?
mess.
Yeah, exactly. For what? They kept their traditions alive yeah, they are not completely messed up with LGBT and whatever um, letter you want to add to that. And they have, for the most part, not fallen for wokeism and what have you. Why in the world would Putin be interested in the rest of the EU? You know, even if I had, first of all, I don't like war, but even if I had the capability, I would stay away from the EU, you know, like, no, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't. I mean, the only problem is it is the West that has this sort of superiority complex.
Yeah.
Okay, they need to maintain Russia and Asia in general, in the category of barbarian, less developed. Even if they've developed the atom bomb or whatever it is that the Chinese are doing, they're still barbarians. Nobody has reached the heights of civilization that the West has reached. And so, since they don't admit to themselves how much war has gone into making them the supposedly superior uh, part of the world. Well, no, I mean, there's a really pathetic inability of the West to look at its own self in the mirror and to be able to stop blaming others for the shit that you've done. You know, um, this business that it's only in the West that you have human rights and rule of law. I mean, that is falling apart so very obviously now. The West, the West built its wealth on the Roman Church and Empire
Mm.
and on colonization.
Yeah.
It's a parasite. Okay. So, with that, it could bring in all sorts of resources that the other nations that have been parasitized have been deprived of. But I mean, the West is more and more people in the West are waking up to the fact that, well, what Putin says makes more sense than what they say in the West. And actually, the Russians don't seem to want to take over the West. And why? And as you say, why should they? Why should they? I
A
mean,
shithole. Total
it's
shithole.
tiny. Well, okay, you've still got very beautiful cities, right? You've got,
Yeah, but
okay,
have you visited lately?
no, the
Yeah.
last was
Yeah.
before COVID, and I've been seeing Judith over the past 25 years going back to Europe every year. I've
Mm.
been seeing it fall apart a little bit more every year. I've been seeing fewer and fewer smiles on people's faces. And, okay, for a long time I thought it was just me because I've become Asian and what have no, it's a fact. But, you know, most Europeans are not prepared to face the fact that the era of Europe, the era of the West, is on the
Over.
decline.
Mm.
Okay. And it's time to move on. And, perhaps if we could get together with all the other nations in the world and together start imagining a better world for everyone where there are no parasites, that might be a nice idea. And perhaps we get the whole world population to agree with that kind of program. But, okay, it's up to us to start putting those ideas out, out in the atmosphere and out in the blogosphere and out in the YouTubosphere. Um, okay, our leaders, they're possessed by the Elohim program,
Mm.
basically. It's demonic.
Do you think that the gods themselves are mind controlled?
Which ones?
All of them. I'm not talking about the true creator. That is not what that is to me a world
Well, it's
of
not a
difference.
god. That's not a god. a god is by definition, if you can put the word a god or the god, it's by definition a finite being.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
Okay, it
I
doesn't
know,
work.
but most people, when they hear the word God, they think of.
Well, that's the brain. That's the brain problem, the brainwashing that they're going to have to, deal with, and which is where it's a very good idea for us to have a conversation that, at least a bunch of your friends are going to listen to, and they may disagree or agree, but at least we're putting out these notions. My sense is that there is, what I call the techno-mind God is a very powerful entity who has absorbed all the others. I mean, it's not for nothing that the gods of ancient Greece and ancient Rome are no longer, the object of the veneration of the masses. Okay, there may be one or two of them, or there's, the cult of Mithraeus, that certain elite people continue with, and Baphomet or whatever. Okay, these are their particular sort of cult things. But in terms of, the religion or the beliefs of the masses, well, no. I mean, you've got Allah, you've got the Christian God, whoever that may be. And then, in different people's minds, it may well be that actually it's Mary, the Virgin Mary, as an embodiment of the eternal feminine that is a real presence for a majority of Christians, because she has compassion, because they can, she's not going to judge them. So, but she's not a goddess. She's some kind of a feminine principle. So you've got all sorts of nuances in all this.
Yeah, but you
okay.
also have this archetype of the Queen of Heaven, and actually the Catholic Church portrays her in the style of the Queen of Heaven, and then yeah, Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, it doesn't matter. They are all very, very similar.
Sure,
So
but then, but they've been given, these characteristics by humans, be it by the priesthood or by the masses who need these feminine entities to be like maternal, nice ladies who give them a glass of warm milk to put the baby to sleep, kind of thing, to give comfort. So that's, I prefer to talk of some kind of a feminine principle adapted to the needs of, on the one hand, the priests, and on the other hand, the people. Across the, Western Christianity, there's this phenomenon of the Black Madonna, venerated by the people, not by the priests. Okay, so there's folk. The folk spirituality is a very powerful force that modifies what the priests put in their books. So that's another interesting thing. The way people, they maintain quite a lot of the pagan substance in the guise of Christian saints and the Virgin Mary and whatever the family of the prophet.
The Bible talks about the siblings of Jesus. So how can she be a virgin?
Oh,
yeah, I mean, come on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so stupid. It's not even interesting anymore. I mean, they hated the feminine so much. Okay, they eradicated the feminine, and then after a few centuries, they realized, oh shit, we need to bring her back. But we sanitize her. She's a virgin. And it's just because an angel farted in her ear that something happened. Okay, so Great. I mean, but at least they brought her back. Now, to what extent the masses believe that this mother is a virgin? Okay. On the other hand, in nature, there is the phenomenon of parthenogenesis. The mother cell does not need a guy to fertilize her to divide herself into two daughter cells. Okay. So, I mean, there are different aspects to, different angles through which these things can be considered. And there are certain species of animals that, okay, when they need to, they're masculine, they're male, and when they need to, they switch over to female. And then, bloop, once it's done, you go right back to male. So, okay, the church put its dogma on this, but these things are highly variable and yeah.
So now the question becomes, how do we get rid of those entities?
Which ones?
Well, the Elohim, the entire structure that they left behind, first of all, it's probably hard work to make people see that a huge chunk of what you have been worshiping is actually working against you.
Well, if you can start seeing that your worship of the medical system is crumbling before your very eyes, okay, you've got the god of medicine that's dying. With the whole monetary crisis that is crashing faster and faster, whatever they're going to do to fix it and replace it with virtual money or what have you, more and more people are realizing that the god of money is a crappy god. So, just I think, from our present reality, so many systems in which we had 150% belief are crumbling. And then, well, either you're going to continue going to church because praying to that God actually makes your soul feel better, or the crumbling of the modern secular gods is going to make those other gods also crumble. And the other part of this is going to have to be the people suddenly finding inside themselves resources that they never knew they had when they have to deal with, disaster hitting them and their family and their friends. We haven't reached that stage yet en masse, but there are more and more, people, ordinary people who are speaking up, who are blowing the whistle, who are starting up organizations and movements and online things for all the vaccine injured to, since they're not being recognized by their governments or their doctors, at least they can talk together. So there's all sorts of stuff that is happening out of human desire and ingenuity to help each other to start building something really better than the empire that is crumbling. So it's beginning to happen in terms of, the official religions. As far as Christianity is concerned, I mean, at least in the West, perhaps, well, I mean, America is a different kind of thing,
Yeah, that's you can't compare that to Europe.
But Europe is, I mean, okay. It's over.
Yeah, here Christianity is done. And the Islamization of Europe is in full gear now. Berlin, Frankfurt, I don't know if there were other cities. Now they have pulled up Ramadan, lightning, and but they, on the other hand, they were very upset when somebody put up a Christmas tree and a snowman because Muslims could feel, yeah, that you hurt their feelings.
Oof.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Well,
and I'm not even, I'm not even defending, Christmas and the Christmas tree and what, because I know it's all bullshit. Yeah, that is not
exactly.
what I mean. But the acceptance of what your tradition, is replaced by, and there is hardly any resistance to it.
Well, that tells you to some extent, how far we've been degraded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
It also tells you that, the thing that you would oppose to that Islamization, well, Christianity is no longer that tool.
No,
That
it
Christianity
isn't.
is no longer what gives you the strength to, do a crusade against the Muslims. Um, the Muslims, it's a, a lot of it can be, a lot of what they're doing is officially, because they are Muslims, but fundamentally, they're pissed off with the West for having been a parasite on the rest of the world for a long time. They're
Mhm.
wanting to, have their share of the pie. They're being manipulated, and as soon as they start realizing that they're being manipulated, they're going to get pissed off against their manipulators. Uh, perhaps I don't have my pulse on the Muslim world, but yeah, if you add into the mix the whole mess.
Actually, I think that is the one religion that would need a renaissance badly, and really, really fast, because the fanaticism, yeah,
Yeah, but it's
that is,
but it's badly manipulated. I
yeah,
mean,
I
okay,
know.
the whole Wahhabi thing from Saudi Arabia, which has infiltrated in all the Muslim countries. But when
Mhm.
you understand that, at least across Asia, the spread of Islam came through the Sufis. And the Sufis, they merged with the local cultures. They brought some good ideas because they came from what was at that time in the Middle Ages. The Islamic culture was much more brilliant than the Western Christian.
Mhm.
They had inherited all the stuff from the Greeks from Alexandria, and they had kept that wisdom alive. And, all these Sufi people they were cultivating the subtle reality behind the religion, which is why they would be persecuted by their own sort of form of Wahhabi. But basically, they are the ones who spread Islam as a religion of peace, basically.
Yeah, but it is not.
It is not, it's been manipulated. Exactly like, whatever Jesus said as a good guy, it got manipulated, and then you had to go and do crusades all over the world in the name of a peace-loving guy. Great. Okay. So the Muslims are having to go through that phase, but they had a very high period of civilizational excellence
Yeah, that's true,
in the
but that
Middle
is
Ages.
gone.
So it's gone, but it can be revived. People can, remember that. But then for that, Islam would have to stop being manipulated the way it is now geopolitically. And, thank you, the CIA also, for, creating Al Qaeda and all those things. So, we can lay it once again at the feet of Christianity, of certain forces within Christianity that decided that they could weaponize other religions. And then, there's the Judaic thing behind that also. Um, And, the mess that's going on now with Palestine and the worldwide support for Palestine against Israel, where is this going to go? Judith,
Have you seen the protests in Gaza against Hamas?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, nobody's talking about that because the Gazan people have had it with Hamas up to here. And of course, nobody is
Okay.
saying that
That's
in the
that's
news.
that's very interesting. Well, since Hamas anyway was not created by the Palestinians, but by
No, yeah, I know. It was created by Israel as a counterpoint to PLO. But yeah, people are really, really fed up with Hamas because they say, I don't want these hostages. I don't want war. I just want to live in peace here. I don't have the same goals. I need something to eat. I need a roof over my head. And and it is no secret that these leaders of Hamas, they don't even live in Gaza.
yeah,
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 they are
right.
in Lebanon, they are in Abu Dhabi and in Qatar and what have you. So that gave me a glimpse of hope, but only a glimpse, you know?
But Judith, it's across the Muslim world. Most
Mm,
Muslims are really extremely fed up with all the terrorism that takes place in the name of Islam.
mm,
That's not their Islam. So, uh, well, we're just waiting for the masses of Muslims to rise up in the name of peace and to,
yeah.
and to disavow all the violence that is done in the name of their religion. In the same way as, the Christians ought to have disavowed a lot of stuff that was done in the name of their religion. And in the same way as a lot of Jews are now absolutely disavowing what is being done by Israel against the Palestinians, and has been done for the past 70 years. So once again, the great numbers of ordinary people who want peace and who want to, for human beings to live real lives. It's
Mm,
just so fundamentally simple, but the problem is the poisons that have been put inside our minds.
yeah. And the Kool-Aid is still consumed.
Well, yeah, I mean, for a lot of people are in great confusion now because they may feel that the Kool-Aid isn't exactly what it used to be, but at the
Mm,
same time, they haven't found something, once again, as a degraded race, we're very fragile
yeah.
collectively. And, most people individually are very fragile because if your safety in life, apart from having a house, a car, and a job, if your safety in life is that you rely on a God, to give you that strength that is inherent in you, um, as long as you're with that kind of addiction, the minute that God betrays you and the house is taken away from you, well, you're very, very, very fragile.
Mm,
And the same goes for the people of other religions.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show that these religions are just part of the system that has been oppressing us.
Well, of course, that's the mind control. It's the mind control without having to, most of the time kill us. It used to kill us, and then eventually they realized it would be much less trouble for us, the priests and the kings, if people internalize these things inside themselves and believed that it's only we, the priests and the kings, who can be their, mediator between themselves, their fallen souls, and the high spirits above. The minute we can, reestablish our direct connection with the subtle reality, with the sun, with the sky, with the magic of nature, and the magic of who we are, game over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, have we left out anything? Is there something that you would like to add?
I would just like to urge everybody to start feeling into that real human who is still there in all of us, that has been, suppressed, put into a prison somewhere, but is still very much there. And, the more the incarnated being that we are can just start taking the thoughts up here with a grain of salt and just be in touch with the deeper layers of who we are, and then we can recover lost ground, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah. Okay. I totally agree. So that was it, guys. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Enna Reittort, and we are going to see you all next time. Until then, stay safe and sound. Bye bye.